Hello, my name's Roisin. Let's talk about classics. Hello friends and welcome to my channel. In today's video I'm doing a little bit of a cheat. I am not feeling particularly well, so I am in my bed, and on top of that I am doing a tag video, but not just any tag video. Today I am doing the classics tag, or the classic book tag, which is obviously a tag all about classic literature. The reason though that it's kind of cheating is because I've actually filmed this video before. This is one of the earliest videos on my channel, so I thought I would redo it. That video had like 20 something views and I have now made it private. I haven't rewatched it, so I don't know what any of my answers were to these questions, but I thought I would do it again now that there are more of you and I know that lots of you are interested in classics and classic literature. So without further ado, let's get into these questions. The first one is instantly negative, an overhyped classic that you really didn't like. Well, I think I've talked about this before. I don't tend to get on particularly well with mid-century classics, particularly, and by that I mean mid-20th century, particularly mid-20th century American classics written by men, which is very specific, but there actually are quite a lot of them. So the one that I really didn't get on with, that is really lauded, particularly among young men, I think, is The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger. I really dislike this book. I think the way that it talks about sex workers is really disgusting. It's very misogynistic. It is also really quite boring. So there are a lot of reasons I didn't get on with this, but especially I read it as a teenager when I felt much more that I needed to get on with characters, which is no longer how I feel, but I do still feel like that book was particularly misogynistic, and the only character it allowed to be fully developed and human was this main like entitled male character, and so I really didn't get on with it. And also the writing style really is not my style at all. I prefer things to be a bit more lyrical and beautiful, and I don't think that J.D. Salinger managed that at all in his book. Question number 2 is your favourite time period to read about. I would say that the time period that I have read most is Victorian Classics. I think because there are so many of them, because the novel was like still a new form in the 18th century, so there are quite a lot of classics from the Victorian period, and also because I think particularly in the UK, in our education system, we really tend to lean towards those Victorian classics, or just 19th century classics more broadly. So I have read quite a few of them, but I'm not sure necessarily that that's my favourite time period to read about. Recently I have been enjoying reading historical fiction set in the 17th and 18th centuries, so I have been enjoying learning about that time period, particularly in Europe. It's a very interesting upheaval time period in Europe. There's a lot that goes on from like the death of Queen Elizabeth up until the Victorian period. That's a huge period of change. Obviously it's 230 years, you would expect there to be a lot of change, but I think that that period specifically in Europe is kind of quite the formation of Europe, which is quite an interesting time period to read about. But I do struggle a little to get on with some of the classics from that period. Like recently I read Waverley by Sir Walter Scott, and they do just assume that the people who are reading them have had the kind of education that they have had, so there will be a lot of allusions to things I don't know, things written in German which I don't speak, and so you have to flick back to the notes. So I find it harder to get immersed in classics of that time period. I think for me personally, recently, what is more interesting to me rather than the time period the classics are written from is the place that the classics are written from. I have become much more interested in reading classics from outside of the UK and the US. Not that I've read a huge amount of American classics, but a lot of them don't really draw me in, but I've been really intrigued into reading classics from different places. So recently, this year, I have read Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe and Segu by Maurice Condé. I am definitely more interested in reading classics set in Africa or in Asia, and I want to read more classics set in Latin America. So for me, I'm interested in what is considered to be like seminal fiction from outside of the culture that I'm used to reading that fiction from, new and interesting to get from those time periods. I'm not against reading more British classics or American classics, but yeah, I'm very intrigued by classics from around the world. Question number 3 is, what is your favourite fairy tale? I think my favourite fairy tale is fairly basic. Beauty and the Beast, I think, probably is one of my favourite fairy tales. I've always enjoyed that story. I just love the like gothic castle feeling, and the transformation aspect of it. I'm not a huge fairy tale person though. I know more about Greek and Roman myths because I have a classics degree, so that's kind of more my area of knowledge than fairy tales. And also, like I said about reading more from around the world, you tend to encounter more like foundation myths of different countries. Like I've just finished reading a book set in Zimbabwe, and it talks about foundation myths of the country of Zimbabwe, or a book set in Madagascar and talks about the foundation myths of Madagascar as well. So foundation myths, I think I always find really interesting how countries conceptualize themselves through foundation myths. So it's not quite the same as a fairy tale, but I definitely think origin stories are really interesting, and also flood stories, because they are everywhere. Like there is obviously the biblical flood story, which could be the same flood that is in the Epic of Gilgamesh, but there is also an Aboriginal flood story. So there are flood stories from around the world, which I find very fascinating. Question number 5 is top 5 classics that you would like to read soon. I haven't done any research before starting filming this video, so I'm going to have to do this off the top of my head. Number 1 is going to be 2, because they're by the same author. So either Love in the Time of Cholera or 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. I own both of those books, and as I mentioned, I want to read more classics from outside of the UK US. So Garcia Marquez is a Colombian author, so I would like to read his works. He's like the founding father of magical realism, writing in the early 20th century, I believe. Born in 1927, so he is a mid-century writer, but I feel like a lot of his books are set earlier than that, because I've started to read Love in the Time of Cholera before, and I feel like it's kind of set in the like late Victorian era. So yeah, that's the first one of those Garcia Marquez books. One that I'm actually on my TBR for May is Cry the Beloved Country by Alan Paton, and that is a classic set in South Africa. Alan Paton was a white South African anti-apartheid activist who wrote this book, Cry the Beloved Country, about a man who loses his son, and it is set, I think it was written in 1948 when apartheid started in South Africa. So it is kind of a classic of that era and something that I would like to explore. Number 3 would be The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas, who is a French writer, and it is The Count of Monte Cristo is quite famous and well known, but it is written in 1845, and it is a tale of suffering and retribution inspired by a real-life case of wrongful imprisonment. And as far as I know, The Count of Monte Cristo is kind of like a con man tale, and it's quite funny, comedic, as well as being epic. So that's kind of why I would like to read it. I'm intrigued by more like funny classics. I've already read all of Austen, who writes comedies, of course, but yeah, I'd like to read that one, because it's a big chunk of a book, because in the 19th century they like to write thousands of pages, but it is one that I've heard is humorous, and I think that that's really drawn me in. Another I would like to read is War and Peace. I have talked before about how I have this kind of notion of the Russians and a really strong desire to read Russian literature, but I'm also really, really intimidated by them. Again, chunky books, and with really lots of characters who all have patronymic names, so easy to get them confused when you are not used to a patronymic naming system. But I think that because I've watched the BBC miniseries adaptation of War and Peace, and 2, because Simon Hazel over on Bookstagram has said that War and Peace would be commercial fiction were it published today. Both of those things have made me feel like it is less inaccessible, less intimidating than some of the other Russian classics. I tried to read Crime and Punishment last year, and that one is so philosophical that I feel like I need to be like eased into Russian classics before I read that. So I've got one left. And then number 5 that I would like to read is one that my dad gave me, but I haven't read yet. I know he really, really likes it, and that is The Sailor Who Fell from Grace with the Sea, which is by Yukio Mishima, and this is a Japanese classic. It's a very short book, so I feel like it should be manageable. It's one which tells the story of a band of savage 13-year-old boys who reject the adult world as illusory, hypocritical and sentimental, and train themselves in a brutal callousness they call objectivity, which sounds really relevant for today, with a lot of those savage young men who call themselves objective when they are just brutally callous. And also because it's recommended by my dad, I feel like I need to read it. Question number 6 is favourite modern book or series which is based on a classic. I feel like I should have done some research before I started doing this video, because I can't think of any books that are based on classics. I mean, I can think of some books that are based on like myths and stuff, but like I didn't enjoy The Children of Jocasta or A Thousand Ships by Natalie Haynes. I just don't really like her writing style. Bridget Jones's Diary is based on Pride and Prejudice, and I really enjoy that book. Despite it being very much like women's fiction and like revolving around men, and also a lot of talk around weight loss and disordered eating. Like in the book, she's Bridget is even called out by her friends for how disordered her eating is, which I think is good, but its discussion of numbers could potentially be triggering. But I still think that despite this being written in the 90s, a lot of the humour still works today. I haven't read it though for 10 years, so perhaps I would feel differently, but I know that Lauren from Lauren and the Books and Lena Norms both think that it still stands up today, and it's a book that I have always loved for the warmth and the heart of it, and for the fact that it, like before Fleabag, was allowing women to be gross and fully rounded. Women didn't just have to be the like stern scold in comedy. This was really a gross, untogether woman in her 30s. And then also His Dark Materials is a book series that I love, which is based on, well, it's kind of a response to John Milton, isn't it? Paradise Lost, about how like sin causes us to lose paradise, and in His Dark Materials, no spoilers, but Lyra gains paradise through what is considered sin. So I definitely have always enjoyed those books and the way that they talk about religion and the symbolism in them. So yeah, I would consider that as some of my favourite books based on a classic, although I've never read John Milton. Question number 7, favourite movie TV series based on a classic. Well, I love a lot of the adaptations of Jane Austen. I love all 3 of the adaptations of Emma that I've seen. The 1995 Pride and Prejudice. I love the Emma Thompson Sense and Sensibility. So yeah, I've enjoyed a lot of those. I also enjoy both adaptations of Little Women that I've seen, 1994 and 2019. Oh, and the adaptation of North and South with Richard Armitage. North and South is one of my favourite classics that I feel like doesn't get as much love as it should. And so I think that the Richard Armitage for episode BBC miniseries adaptation is a really, really good adaptation of that as well. Question 8 is worst classic to movie adaptation, and so I would say Troy, which is an adaptation of the Iliad, with Brad Pitt's terrible British accent, and yeah, I would say that that is a pretty bad adaptation, with a lot of it really, really changed to just be like sexy modern. I think that people were trying for a while in the early 2000s to make like a Greek epic adaptations, Greek and Roman stuff, take off after the success of Gladiator, and it just never really did, because they were so terrible, and because they really, really changed the originals, and because the originals aren't told in a story that really works for a modern format. I think that you have to alter them quite a lot to get them to actually work. But yeah, I think that's a really bad film. Also 300, I would say, if you consider Herodotus to be a classic, I would say that that is a bad adaptation of a classic. Terrible film. So much ridiculousness, like uber macho-ness, which I thought was absolutely stupid. So yeah, those adaptations of Greek and Roman classics to screen, I feel like you need the campy 60s versions with the bad puppets, really. They're the only ways you're going to get any fun out of them. Question 9, favourite editions you'd like to collect more classics from? I think there are lots. I think that Vintage and Penguin particularly do really, really good really, really good covers for them. I love all the ones that are like firm paperbacks with the French flaps. There's the Russians ones, the Jane Austen ones, the Bronte ones, the Virginia Woolf ones. There are loads that I really, really like from that, but I'm not a huge book collector. I don't really own a lot of books, and I tend to borrow my books from the library, so whilst I can really appreciate those beautiful editions, I'm never really going to collect a book for just the prettiness of the book. I really feel strongly against owning books that I don't like, or books that I never plan on reading, just for my personal feelings. If you own those books, that's fine. I have no judgment on anyone who does own books that they don't like, don't plan on reading just because they're pretty. Like, that's your choice. But for me, I don't have the money to be spending on books that I'm not going to read, do I? Even if they are beautiful. So I'm not a huge book collector. I can really admire a lot of these editions, but the cloth-bound classics, love them. I really do think Penguin does a really good job with classics. I can't really think of any of the others that I really like. Maybe they just do a really good job of marketing those classics. There's the Drop Caps classics as well. I think that's what they're called. I like those ones. And then the final question, number 10, is an underhyped classic that you would recommend to everyone. Well, as I mentioned, North and South. If you like Pride and Prejudice, and you like Pride and Prejudice, and you kind of are interested in, like, if you like Pride and Prejudice and Dickens, I think you would like it. It definitely deals with the urban poor in a way that Dickens does, although it is set in the north of England during the Industrial Revolution, and it's kind of about the beginnings of the labour movement as well, which is very interesting. Quite a lot of God stuff, so if you're not into that, maybe that would put you off, but I definitely enjoy the sort of slow burn romance and the like talking about labour and rights and this girl from the south from a small village learning about it. Although I do think it does kind of romanticise being rural poor in a way. And then also I would recommend Segu by Maurice Condé. I would also recommend Segu by Maurice Condé if you want to read classics from other parts of the world. She was a Guadeloupean author, French author from Guadeloupe, the middle of the 20th century, but Segu is set in the late 18th, early 19th century in Segu, which was the capital of the Bambara people in modern day Mali, and it writes about like their interactions with the West and also Bambara culture and interactions between Bambara and Islam. So there are a lot of like cultural things, lots of huge amount of characters, lots of different themes and ideas discussed, and I think done in such an interesting way and very much written kind of folklore-y fairy tale vibes, if that is something that you're into. So there you go, that is the classics tag. I hope you have enjoyed the reworking of this video. I think my answers will have been quite different from the first time, but that's private now, so you will never know. Please remember to give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, and if you'd like to answer any of those questions in the comments below, I'd love to hear your responses. I will leave the questions in the description, so if you want to answer them, I'd love to hear what you have to say. Thank you for watching. Please remember to give this video a thumbs up if you liked it and to subscribe. I put out new videos every Wednesday, Friday and Sunday, so I will see you again very, very soon. Thank you for watching. Bye bye.